all my friends, because I wanted to party with them. So, this is my best friend that I party. Those are Rob actually said this is going, but that was my best friend to this point. Now, someone who is going to be able to sign these wonderful books that you got. I love the presses. Because Judge Vernon had this book released in Garden for the Southeast. And I will let you do the rest of your introduction to Susan Varlamoff.
It's great to be here. Louise and I we're both from New York City, you can believe that. From the South, so we have a lot of stories, but it's been a great adventure, and I've enjoyed so much living here. What I was going to do is give you a background. If you want to shut the lights up,
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, good, perfect. A background on why I wrote this book on sustainable gardening for the Southeast. I had been with the University of Georgia about 18 years, and when I first came, I'm a biologist by training. I have a master's degree in environmental pollution control. And when I first came to the University of Georgia, there was a study, a water quality study that showed that urban watersheds were more polluted with pesticides than rural watersheds. And I got to thinking, well, that seems odd. We would have expected the opposite. So in rural watersheds, farmers, where farmers live, they're liable for any pollution they cause. And it's mighty expensive to use pesticides. In urban areas, professional applicators are trained by the University of Georgia in integrated pest management. But who trains farmers? And you know the adage, if a lizard's good, more must be better. So anyway, I thought, well, let me see about possibly doing some training materials for homeowners. But I thought, well, that's fine, but if we write them, will they use them? So we did a survey of Georgia gardeners and found out that 69% were very interested in doing environmentally friendly gardening, but they wanted information. So we produced a training manual and we produced brochures, and they were like really hot. It's so amazing. We reproduced them thousands and thousands of copies. And even one night, I'm in Gwinnett County, a snowy, wintry night, there were 100 people at the workshop on environmental friendly gardening. So we knew we were onto something. Now, this was for best management practices to reduce non-clean source pollution, mostly in urban areas. So I got to thinking, well, that's just one issue that we have to be concerned with, environmental issues. There's biodiversity, there's soil, there's invasive plants, native plants. So I thought, let me expand that to include all the environmental issues. So this has been a grand project over 8 years. And I use the best science-based practices from Southern land-grant universities and even across the country. Doug Tallamy, if you know him, has endorsed it, which I'm thrilled about. And so that's the result. There's also a personal reason I did this, and probably almost more important. When I was 14 years old, way back in the 60s there, yes, my sister died of acute leukemia. And I'm the oldest of 5 children. And my father was a big supporter and user of DDT, chlorine, and all these chemicals. I never made any connection until recently. I was finishing off my book, and I saw a 1987 study that said that by a group of doctors that surveyed homeowners from that period that used DDT, and others that didn't. And it was a 7 times higher rate of acute leukemia in children. And that's not good. So, we never forget what it's like to walk behind a gas system. So I've decided let's try to garden without all this. And so that's how I got started. Okay, that's right. So why do we want to garden to sustain the earth? Essentially to enhance local ecosystems. Why do we want to enhance local ecosystems? because they perform services, ecological services, that all of us rely on for our survival. Not just us, but all life on Earth. And they include pollination, water and air purification, pest management, temperature moderation, nutrient cycling, waste management, and provision of food and shelter for all life. The thing is, these things go on without us even realizing it. Essentially, there are biogeochemical cycles that are responsible for keeping ecosystems moving. And if you remember back in biology class, are you able to see around me? Okay. Okay. Ivan says I should go on the other side. Okay. Let me do that. That's probably better. Okay. The carbon cycle. CO2 is circulated throughout the atmosphere, and then it's essentially humans and plants have opposite cycles: respiration and photosynthesis. We take in oxygen, release carbon dioxide. The plants, the trees, they take in the CO2 and release oxygen. We need each other. Okay? Plants that have been in the ground for millennia have become the fossil fuels that we use today. Okay, so we decide we're gonna take all those fossil fuels out, burn them, and it's releasing the CO2 that was once locked in their tissues. That's putting more CO2 in the atmosphere. At the same time, we're cutting down the trees. Whoops. How do I do that?
Hit that arrow button.
Cool, I did it. We're chopping down the trees. So they're not there to receive the CO2. The result is we've got global warming, climate change. I'm giving quickly these cycles only because the practices that I've come up with will show how we're disrupting these cycles. They're absolutely vital for our life. Then, of course, the water cycle, we know about that. It's very simple. It rains, the water comes down, it goes in the earth, runs into the water bodies, goes into the aquifers, underground aquifers, is used by the trees, the plants. Through transpiration, its water evaporates, and it goes to the clouds and comes down. However, what we're doing, obviously, in urban areas is we're paving over the land. So the water can't go in the ground and into the aquifers. Any disruption to these cycles on a large scale will inhibit our ability to survive. We are really at carrying capacity now on the planet for supporting life, our human life. And the environmental issues we face are climate change. The climate has gone up 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 100 years. We've lost 50% of the topsoil in the last 50 years. Declining pollinators, I believe it's like a third in the last 10 years. Biodiversity loss, water and air pollution in our cities, of course. Water shortages, as we saw in the drought. Destruction of wildlife habitat. We only have 2 to 3% of original wildlife habitat left on Earth. It's incredible. And of course, we're being overrun with invasive, non-native species. And so, in writing this book, I thought, gardeners are so close to the earth. And we've gotten into Star Wars out. We can be a force for good. Gardening is the #1 hobby of Americans. Urban and suburban gardens cover a huge amount of land in suburban and urban areas. In fact, I think in Georgia, like 9 million out of 10 million people live in urban and suburban areas. That's commanding a lot of land. Gardens, depending upon how they are managed, can enhance or degrade the environment. And we know that from the water quality studies in Atlanta, showing that the water is degraded. How can gardeners help? Now, these are the titles to my chapters. And I wanted the book to read the way a person would garden. So design with nature, increase soil fertility, plant trees that fight climate change, restore biodiversity with native plants, plant resilient landscapes, use sustainable lawn care, it's possible, water wisely, manage pests naturally, grow food organically, and bring wildlife home. Design with nature. The focus of the book is basically to hook up with nature. In other words, we've got all these biogeochemical processes going. Why fight nature? Just hook up and you'll see how we're going to be doing talking about this, and let her do the heavy lifting. And that way you can lay back in your hammock and don't worry about pest control, because if you have biodiversity, diversity of native plants, the native plants will attract pests, beneficial insects that will manage the pests. So it's basically doing things mimicking Mother Nature, as I say. Team up with her. Create a sustainable landscape which is biodiverse, recycles water and nutrients, removes pollutants, degrades and assimilates waste, reduces greenhouse gases, provides food for wildlife and humans, and offers a place to play. That will all happen by following these practices in the book. Elements of good design. Vegetate areas to absorb greenhouse gases and restore soil fertility. Always, always important to have green on your ground, because those plants are going to be pulling in the CO2. And they're also going to be restoring soil fertility. Minimal impervious paved surfaces to allow water to infiltrate into soil and underlying aquifers. If you live along a stream, a pond, a lake, it's mandatory to have a 25-foot buffer of trees and various plants, because essentially the buffer filters the water before it goes in the lake. And of course, you're going to have a compost pile. That's my neighbor. She's so happy. And she's a native plant enthusiast, so she's really excited because there's a native plant here in front of her compost pile. Swales and rain gardens to filter storm water, pollutants, rain barrels and cisterns to capture water for irrigation. How many people have rain barrels? Quite a few. All right. They came really handy during the drought. And when they were empty, I was taking my bath water and running it down the stairs and getting some aerobic exercise. Native trees and plants to restore biodiversity. That can't be understated. I'll discuss that. Preserve natural areas. In my subdivision, we have a green belt around the back of our property. Actually, it runs around the whole subdivision. So a lot of us, including my family, we have left, the native woods and all that to back up to this green belt. That way you increase the wildlife corridor there. Do any of you have those kind of subdivisions with like green? Okay. It's starting to become very popular. And vegetable, fruit, and herb gardens, the ultimate fast food. Elements of good design continue here. Water-wise landscape is very important. And there's no need to completely tear out all your plants and change everything. You can retrofit your landscape, but essentially this is the formula that they suggest at the University of Georgia. Low water use areas. Essentially what you're doing is you're grouping plants according to their water needs. Establish trees and shrubs, like in the woods. Mother Nature waters them. You don't really have to do anything. Medium water use are your perennials and your lawn. Shouldn't be more than 30%. And then high water use, which is usually your containers and annuals, bright annuals near the front or on the back door, not more than 10%. They're water hogs, and you've got to typically water them, especially during dry days, rainless days, almost every day. This is on the EPA website, and this is a water-wise landscape. You see there's very little wrong here. Increase soil fertility. As you know, the soil is the absolute foundation of plants. It's got to be good. the red clay in Georgia, sadly, is not conducive to flourishing gardens. So we have to do something about amending it. And I found an interesting fact. Working in the College of Agriculture, they said that they planted cotton in Georgia from the mountains to the sea, and that depleted all the topsoil in the state. So we gardeners are left with. There's my husband's hand holding rock solid clay. The benefits of fertile soil, you know all that. Regulates water flow, the water goes through quickly. Otherwise, if you dig a hole in that kind of clay, the water just stays there, and your plant's going to rot. Conserves water because if the soil is moist, it'll hold the water and close to the plants. Sustained life filters pollutants. These soil microbes are incredible, all that they do. Besides being decomposers, they filter a lot of pollutants. Of course, they recycle nutrients. I think that's like magic. A plant dies or an animal dies, and it's completely converted to nutrients through a process where all these micro and macroorganisms degrade the material, organic material, stores carbon. They said if we can bring our soils on this earth to high fertility levels, we can mitigate climate change to a huge degree. So that's a big thing that farmers are looking at too. But certainly gardeners can do that in their small plots. It tolerates weather variations. This is the soil food web. This won't be on the exam. I don't think so, right? It's complex. You've got very small microorganisms, obviously, birds and these worms and everything else. So basically our job is to feed these creatures, give them food, water, and air. In other words, we've got to keep that soil porous and with good texture. They say that there's more organisms in a shovel full of soil than there are people on the planet. And to begin with, I have to plug out the extension service. Have the soil analyzed, and these bags are available at these extension offices, and I just happen to have a little stock there. So if you need any, and then they will let you know, depending upon what you want to grow, how you have to amend the soil, what you need to put in. And then improve the soil with organic fertilizer compost. Synthetic fertilizers add nothing to the structure. The thing is, when you add compost, you're churning the soil, you're mixing in that clay, and you're making a good porous base for your plants. If the soil is compacted, add compost and manure to a depth of 8 to 12 inches. Once the soil is improved, dig it only when necessary to put in plants and pull out weeds. Here's the deal. You saw that soil web? There's all kinds of, this web is going on beneath the soil. If you keep digging it, you're going to disrupt this web here. And there are certain fungi that have filaments that go out between the roots of the plant and the soil, bringing nutrients back and forth. And if you start digging, you're cutting them. So once you get the soil in good shape, add the compost on top every single year. And the worms and all these other creatures will pull in the nutrients and pull them down. Walk with care to avoid compaction. In our cities, the soil is so compacted, especially when you move into a house, the bulldozers and the compactors that really squash the soil, and there's very little air in the soil. The thing is, when you have also a family that is running over the grass and all that, you do compact it, so that's why you have to aerate the soil really every year. Keep the soil covered, preferably with plants, then mulch. Because there are people in my neighborhood, for whatever reason, they think if they have their whole front yard mulched, they're doing right by the environment. Wrong. Plants are the best. In the shaded areas, ground covers. There are many ground covers that work because, again, they're pulling in the CO2. They're keeping the soil fertile. And then, of course, around the soil, around the plants, you'll put mulch. Bare soil, terrible. It erodes and releases carbon. There was a recent article in the New York Times about farmers are looking at cover crops. And we can do this also in our vegetable gardens, that they realize that leaving this earth uncovered in the winter is terrible, and that they need to be putting in plants to put the nitrogen back in the soil. So, but they used to do this back in the day, for rediscovering all these things. If you want to make an ecological statement, plant a tree. And plant an oak tree, because they are the biggest native oak, biggest biodiversity attractors. I mean, imagine all the CO2 these trees can pull down into their leaves and into the earth. And there's a scientist, I don't know if you know him, at the University of Delaware, Doug Tallamy. Any of you know him or heard of him? He's done like 30, 40 years studies on trees and their ability to attract insects. He's an entomologist. And he's determined that the oak tree is the biggest attractor of insects, variety of insects. And of course, these insects are at the base of the food chain. They're eaten by birds and other animals. So a lot of my work, a lot of the text comes from him. When you plant trees, the benefits, they maintain soil fertility, they secure the soil and prevent erosion, particularly along stream banks. You want them there holding back the soil. They increase biodiversity. That's another. If you're going to plant trees, plant many different kinds of native trees. We had stories of Main Street that were planted with elms, and Dutch elm disease came in and wiped out an entire, Main Street trees. So again, you want to have a diverse trees. They store carbon and mitigate climate change. They moderate the climate. That's huge. They keep the earth cool. They keep us cool. I used to work downtown Atlanta, across from the state capitol, and we were wearing hose back in the day, and it was 101, and it was just absolutely awful. I remember getting in my car, driving home, and watching the thermometer going down 10 degrees. My home is in a subdivision with, that's in a green belt. Trees cover my house, and it was wonderful to get home. So they absorb pollutants. No, it's not pollutants. They reduce heating and cooling costs when strategically placed near the home. In my house, we don't have to turn the air conditioning until the temperature outside is 90 degrees. We're saving a lot of money. And of course, they attract wildlife. In fact, I'll show you some pictures here. Choose trees for their desired effect. Begin with natives. Choose trees that will adapt to the site. For example, if you have a power line in your front yard, you don't want to plant a tree that's going to grow 50 feet tall. The power company is going to come down and we've got a lot of those in our subdivision too. We get the wood for chips, which is, there's a benefit. Prepare soil uniformly throughout the projected root zone. Plant trees in winter when they're dormant. That way you're not shocking the trees when they're trying to grow. Awareness, this is a shock. Follow proper planting procedures. Restore biodiversity with native plants. Living systems tend toward diversity. In undisturbed forests, prairies, or marshes live many, many native species. I think we can probably all attest to the fact that if you leave your lawn, it's going to have many different species in there. So that's nature. The reason we need that diversity is because all of these plants attract different insects and different wildlife that balance the ecosystem. They each have a job to do, and they work together, transferring energy and decomposing material and all that. And it's, for me, it's almost like magic. And our job is to provide this diversity of plants, trees, etc. Native plants, as I say, co-evolve with native insects and animals. Each performs an important function in the ecosystem. And we talked about oak trees being attracting the most diverse insects, birds, and mammals. Non-native plants have been introduced into the environment and are non-contributing members of the ecosystem, like a camellia. If you look at the camellia, the leaves are always perfect. None of the local insects want to eat them. They don't recognize them. They didn't co-evolve with them. Now, I'm not in that I cannot have a camellia in my yard because I think they are beautiful. What I'm trying to recommend is have most of your plants native plants. And you need a few splashes of color there. So I've got a few camellias. Invasive non-native plants, you want to get rid of those right away. And we've seen kudzu eating up our forests. They reduce biodiversity and disrupt the ecosystem. Can you name some invasive plants? Besides kudzu. I'm sorry. Yeah. Privet. Wisteria, yeah. China berry, yeah. They're awesome. Yeah, so it's very, very important to get rid of them. So to restore biodiversity in your garden, again, I'm not suggesting that, again, you pull out everything and start all over because that's just too hard. Take an inventory of your plants, remove invasive and replace with natives. Get rid of the invasives right away because they'll just take over. Plant native trees. Replace some grass with a native garden. Redesign small patches of existing garden with natives. And border native gardens or rain gardens can help biodiversity and manage stormwater. In my subdivision, we have a lot of kind of rolling hills, and there are gardens between yards, and some of these gardens are on slope. To put a little rain garden at the bottom there to catch the rainwater coming off and have it filtered is a very good thing. In fact, my husband's family is from Belgium, and it is the law that you must retain the stormwater in your property. So they have cisterns and they have swales on the front of the property. It rains all the time in Belgium, by the way, like in England. So if they didn't do that, you would have, floods going from one end of the country to the other. So the book contains a lot of plants, so you're not hunting through other books for native plants and sun-loving, shade-loving. Plant resilient landscapes. Plants, like people, require certain conditions for good health. When plants are not suited for the site, they become diseased, infested with pests, and they die. And we probably all have experienced that. If you take a dogwood and you put it out there in the full sun, it may or may not work because they're an understory tree. The same with like oak leaf hydrangeas. And vice versa. Things, plants that need to be in the sun, they've got to be there. But they don't flower typically. The other thing is when you are in your garden. I've been in my garden. By the way, the front cover on the book is my garden, but it doesn't look like that anymore because the trees have shaded the grass, and so we've had to cut the grass back. And we had a tree fall over, and all of a sudden we have shade-loving plants there, and poof, we've got this giant patch of sun, which I was kind of excited about because we would like to have vegetables in our garden, but we have mostly shade. So my husband took advantage, and he got a pot of tomatoes, and it's against the covenants in my subdivision. But we grew cleome in the front, which gets this high. He put his tomatoes in the back. And then the azaleas were behind that, they're small ones. So we kind of have a good feel for the summer, growing tomatoes behind the cleome. So, but we did have the sun to do it for the first time. So when choosing plants, it's important to know what their requirements are, where they will thrive. The sun or the shade, what kind of soils, the pH, whether the acid or basic. For example, blueberries, they like acidic soils. It's what, about 4.5 Louise?
Hard to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Whether you have a slope or a gully may retain water. Only certain plants can stand that. If you try to put like a Daphne d'Or, it'll go. Daphne d'Or likes to be a little bit high with dry feet, and if you have a rainstorm or a lot of rain for a while, you may be throwing Daphne in the compost and may not survive. So, and then the water requirements. Okay, so this was my backyard. We bought our home. We had grass in the backyard, and those are the size of the trees. And that worked until the trees, of course, got bigger and shaded the backyard. So after trying to grow the grass in the backyard, we gave up. That's what it looks like now. It's all shaded. Now, you could chop down the trees to keep the grass, but I'm a biologist and environmentalist. How can I do that? So we've got that kind of like a wildlife area here. And that's just a center statue, and it requires no inputs here. It's just, and you can consider things like this in your garden too. It's a focal point, and again, requires no inputs. When you plant your plants, location, 5 plants are adapted to the site, or if you want to have special like bog garden or water garden like we have, you're going to have to change the site to adapt to the needs of the plants. Prepare and amend the soil, again, 8 inches deep. Select pest-free plants. Turn the leaves over in the nursery. Make sure you're not bringing home whatever. And saturate the root ball with water before you plant. So you've got your hole dug, you've got your plant, water the ball, you'll put water in the hole, you put that together, and you're going to have the plants will be able to make contact there with the water, the roots make contact with the water, and both the water and nutrients. Otherwise, if it's dry, it's difficult. Your chances of success are much better when you do that. Read the label. What a concept. And I've not done that too. So install plants using planting dates, spacing, and other factors. Incorporate slow release fertilizer into the planting hole. It prevents runoff of fertilizer. Again, you got to think about those water quality studies in Atlanta showing, fertilizer and pesticides in abundance in our watershed. Water plant thoroughly, of course. And I am a nut about mulch. Mulch the plants, mulch the soil around the plants because it retains the moisture, it maintains an even temperature, and you don't have to pull weeds all the time. Use organic mulch. You can get it from the power companies when they're cutting down trees. Typically, they'll chip all that wood, and I actually run after these trucks and say, hey, 3730 Windhurst Drive. So I have a steady supply of mulch, especially after a storm. You can chase the storms. Caution. When applying fertilizer, if a little is good, more is better is a really, really bad idea. And I can tell you, I've done it. We were living in Columbia, South Carolina, and we were selling our house. And we had wonderful azaleas in the front yard, and I thought, if we could just get those things blooming and bursting with color, we're going to get a good price for this house. Well, I overapplied them, so overapplied fertilizer, so we sold the house with dead plants. So it doesn't take much to overdo it. Do not fertilize during drought, please, and don't overwater plants. It's a good story about overwatering plants. we have a person at the University of Georgia. She works in integrated pest management. And she looks at homeowner plants or photos of plants that are diseased and have pests. And she tries to assess what's wrong. Most of them are overwatered. If you overwater the plants, you make them vulnerable to all kinds of diseases. So, and this was even during the drought. People were like freaked out that the plants wouldn't get enough water and they're overwatered. But stay in my lawn care. I did it. I talked about the lawns. Now, there are some people that think lawns should be obliterated from the earth. I'm trying to take a middle approach because if you have children, you have grandchildren, or you like to have a picnic, like to walk barefoot in the grass, it's a nice little lawn. It doesn't have to be the main part of the yard though. So there's a lot of benefits of well-maintained lawns. 1 acre of grass stores 800 pounds of carbon per year, prevents soil erosion, filters contaminants from water, prevents injuries in children. Oops. Injuries in children who play on it. That's very important. We lived in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. We were there during a drought. They were not watering the fields. The fields were like rock hard. The kids were breaking their arms and legs left and right. So if you have a family that likes to play outside, especially the kids, make sure you maintain their yard well. If it's too compacted, they will get burned. They absorb pollutants such as dust and soot. They cut noise levels because it allows water to penetrate the soil and aquifers. It beats concrete, beats driveways, asphalt. The grass is green. It's very high carbon. I took a soil sample of my regular beds and the grass, 10% carbon there, organic matter. And the other beds, it was like 3%. It also, it's another plant. It adds diversity to the yard. Now, on the downside, we all know the downside. Gas powered tools emit 5% of the air pollution. Now, EPA is required, based on California law, to these are much more, they remove the pollutants better. Nationally, over 70 million pounds of pesticides. That's where the pesticides are coming that are in the watershed in Atlanta, are applied to home lawns. Fertilizers and pesticides, when it properly applied, again, it can run off into streams and rivers. And in urban areas, lawn irrigation can be as much as 50% of the water used in the summer. And that's why during the drought, Carol Couch, who was the head of the EPD, she put a ban on outdoor watering. She put a ban on watering, period, for lawns. What's incredible, though, is we had an overhead lawn, a sprinkler system that we used very regularly. And then it broke, and my husband got just sick of trying to fix it. So we decided to forget it. And we only water the lawn when we see areas that are dry. And we also put a ½ inch of compost every few years on the top of the lawn. And that really makes the soil, improves the fertility of the soil to absorb more water. And during the droughts, our yard is looking pretty good. We recommend UGA that no more than 40% of the landscape be lawn. My darling grandchildren. When you want to have a lawn, think about these things. What purpose will it serve? Because that depends on the grass you choose too. What are the soil and local climate conditions? And is there sufficient water to irrigate it? Now, again, it's a plant, so it's got to be put in the right conditions. Use turf grass varieties adapted to your soils and temperature. The Extension Office has a lot of publications, and in the book, I talk about the different conditions for the different grasses. Lawns do poorly in full shade. We've discovered this in my house. We converted the backyard into a wildlife path. It does badly on slopes also and near mature trees. Consider ground covers. Lawn size should be reduced in areas where there are watering restrictions. Some areas have, and this, since this book is for the Southeast, I took in the whole Southeast. Install lawn is recommended by UGA Cooperative Extension. And I've gotten questions about what is the most eco-friendly lawn grass is centipede. It thrives in all kinds of soils. You don't need to water it much. It doesn't grow much. So here's an example of my neighbor who's sort of trying to grow grass in the shade. It doesn't work. This is us after we gave in to the shade and just planted ground covers. In sustainable lawn care, mow the grass at the proper height, increase a ½ inch in summer to tolerate the drought. Very important. If you scalp it, it's going to dry up much faster. If you raise the blade a little bit, it'll shade the soil, retain moisture. Sharpen the mower blades. Dull blades shred the turf, which requires more water. Recycle the grass clippings. Let them lie, as they say. You can reduce fertilizer applications by 1/3 to 1/2. Don't bag them. Don't bag clippings. Again, you're putting fertilizer right back in the soil. And don't leave clippings on the pavement where they can wash into the water source, into the sewer or wherever. As I said, this is what we do. Water grass only when it shows stress, not on a schedule. Don't overwater the grass. It's only going to run off the property and maybe carry some pollutants with it. Irrigate in the morning after the dew is fallen and before it dries. Fertilizer dues. Fertilize turf grass according to soil test recommendations. Again, this is the value of the cooperative extension. Use a mechanical spreader to distribute fertilizer. Use a drop spreader near water bodies. Close a spreader when passing over driveways and sidewalks. And consider using slow-release fertilizers. Shaded areas, and this is a good deal, needs 20 to 50% less fertilizer than turf in the sun. Don't fertilize dormant lawns. Don't fertilize before rainstorm. And please, don't fertilize during the drought. That's our water barrel there. It's got a good workout during the drought. Again, as I said, you can't have a garden without water. So create a water-wise landscape. Remember, 60% requiring little to no extra water, 30% medium, like perennials in the lawn, and 10% for the annuals. Maintain mulch beds. Once you get your flowers in, keep a layer of mulch there. Every year or every other year, put more mulch out. You will save yourself a lot of time watering. And use rain barrels and cisterns to collect rainwater to use during rainless periods. Make driveways, patios, and sidewalks pervious if you can. Again, in Belgium, they don't have paved driveways, they have pebbles. So our backyard, what we did was we just put pebble paths. Direct the downspouts to drain onto the landscape like there. And if you've got them draining onto the driveway, try to switch it. Or put a kind of a gutter and direct it onto the lawn or garden. And use rain gardens and swales in low-lying areas to prevent water from draining off the property. Okay, this is the chapter that for me is important because I I had a little discussion with one of the entomologists at UGA before I was giving a talk in North Carolina on the book about what pesticides we should use in our homeowner landscapes. We both decided none. We couldn't think of a reason. Again, if you've got a balanced ecosystem, you've got diversity of plants, only 3% of insects are considered pests, and in a balanced ecosystem, the predators, the beneficial insects, will prey on the pests and keep it balanced. Now, if there are a few things that get out of control, I'm going to show you what you can do here. Use pest-free plants, sods, sprigs, and soil amendments. You don't want to bring in any of these problems from the nursery. Replace plants that attract pests. I had a few that did. They just went into the compost pile. I figured, I don't need them. Put them, turn them under. Follow planting instructions. Again, if a plant is not happy where it is, it's going to be vulnerable to getting, as humans, getting sick, disease, and become a target for pests. Apply water and fertilizer only when needed. Again, meeting the needs of the plant. Mow grasses and prune ornamentals according to UVA. Again, in a balanced ecosystem, only 3% of insects are pests. Take time to inspect plants on a regular basis. Scout. Go out there and just take a look and look at the back of the leaves once in a while. You can see if there's some disease. You see a few leaves. It's not the end of the world. Know the signs of disease, and I go through that extensively in the book. Only plant damage that's more than 20% warrants control measures. For example, when we get a little cut, we're not running to the hospital. Same with insects. In fact, professional landscape applicators would, back in the day, bad old days, spray the entire landscape. We don't do that anymore because you're disrupting your nature. Cultural control. Use pest-resistant plant varieties. Rotate vegetables and annuals to avoid nematodes. Cultivate soils to destroy pests and crop residues that may harbor insects, pests, and plant early in the growing season. And remove pests and weeds. Why not? It's good therapy. Cancel the gym membership. Yeah. I mean, when you're out there, using hand tools and pulling weeds, and it's aerobic. Taking water from your second floor, bathtub down the stairs, watering. Prune out disease or insect-infested plants. That's easy. A few leaves are not looking good, clip them off. Kill or hoe to destroy weeds, and use direct water sprays and infested plants to reduce aphids, lace bugs, and other insects. That works great. Roses typically have aphids in the early season. Just spray them off. Grow food organically. We can do this in our yards simply because it's a small area, and if we see a hornworm or something, we can pull those off. It's the ultimate fast food. Actually, that's kind of a cool picture. That was in England. They were trying to show how you can grow food in your front lawn in the winter. So they've got kind of a centerpiece there of lettuce, and parsley, or I'm not sure what else they had, but I thought that was really cool. No transportation costs and greenhouse gas emitted when you produce it in your backyard or front yard, in our case. Increased soil fertility. It's great exercise and guarantees food safety. That's important. Remember, vegetable plants need 6 hours of sun. That's important because I was trying to grow tomatoes in an area that had 3 to 4 hours of sun. I had zero harvest. So amend the soil well. Very, very important. Group vegetables according to botanical family. Rotate crops. again, what happens if you don't rotate the crops, you're gonna get insects and diseases that will be happy to go through those particular plants. But if you trick the pests and rotate them around, they won't have time to cause damage. Use cover crops. Whoops. Yeah. Mulch plants to avoid weeding and to maintain soil moisture. And consult our college's vegetable garden calendar. They have a great garden calendar that shows what to plant in each season and what varieties too. Be imaginative. Be creative. This was in New Jersey where my mother lives. And that is really cool. Obviously, the guy needed the sun, so he put it in his front yard. There's no covenants there, obviously, too. You know, they don't have subdivisions up in North New Jersey because they have Main Street, and then the houses were built around Main Street and all that. So that's what this guy decided to do. If you've got, a backyard deck, or you've got a porch, strawberry jar, just be creative. Think outside the box, or outside the shoe, or inside the shoe. Again, these are just some ideas. Finally, bring wildlife home. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about having a wonderful ecosystem in your yard. You really, can see nature up close and personal. And as I said before, we used to have grass in our backyard, and now we have kind of a wildlife area. And we have a deck, we enlarged the deck so that goes out over the backyard, and I'm thinking, we could have a bird watching party there, get our friends and get out there and watch birds in the late evening. So it's wonderful. It's critical to restore native habitats in urban and suburban areas where wildlife corridors have been fragmented and species are lost. It's a huge problem. You know what they do when they put in a subdivision? They let them land. What about all the animals and the plants that live there? They're gone. Plant native plants to attract native wildlife, remove invasive plants, eliminate pesticide use. That's why pesticides have no place in my garden. And pesticides kill beneficial insects like honeybees. You know that we've lost an enormous amount of honeybees, pollinators. Remove plants that attract pests and keep cats inside. There's our cat. Before I knew this was a problem, this was in Minnesota, and this cat is looking for suicidal birds to come and eat in the feeder. We lose between 1.4 and 4 billion birds to outdoor cats.
But they also go after rodents, so there's a little bit of controversy with that too.
When I had the book reviewed by an ecologist, he said, you better talk about cats. It's a huge problem. And in China, they allow people to have cats no more. Because they have so few birds over there, so few wildlife, that they're just destroying all the birds, killing all the birds. Provide wildlife food sources, trees, shrubs that have nuts and berries, and flowers that give nectar. Provide water sources such as a pond or bird bath. Provide cover for wildlife to hide and nest, such as leaf litter, brush piles, dead trees, and rock piles. Audubon, the Georgia Wildlife Federation, and the National Wildlife Federation have programs that you can certify your yard. You go on their website and they will tell you what you need to have to be considered a certified wildlife habitat. And we did that. That's the National Wildlife Federation. And then you send pictures and you get to put this sign up in your front yard. You're ecologically correct, It's nice. Create themed wildlife habitats. That's fun, but if you do any pollinator patch, pollinator garden is very important. There's a big movement across the the country to put in 1 million pollinator gardens. And they've got a map too, so when you put yours on, you can give your address, and you're one of the million people contributing to bringing back pollinators. And we've got a program through the Cooperative Extension, and Louise knows about that. Butterfly gardens, we have a publication on butterfly gardens, bird-friendly habitats, Audubon, and frog and toad paths. I've got that information in the book too. And these are, again, I have a lot of lists of plants, and these are for those that attract pollinators. Why should we garden sustainably? To the next generation and the next generation. These are my grandchildren, but they could be your children, your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews. They inherit the earth that we leave them. And it's up to us to decide if we want to contribute to a better planet. And as I said, I believe gardeners can do a tremendous lot of good in their small garden and also influence their neighbors too. And that is it. And that is the book I wrote based on this information. Now let me take all your questions. Yes.
Question on rainbows.
Yes.
Where do you start with one? If I